Over the last 10 years, we've had some of the best fantasy video games ever made, and today we're listing 15 of our favorites. Hey guys, it's Mac, and in this video, I have a list of our team's favorite fantasy games from the last decade. Now, of course, the fantasy genre is so huge, and it doesn't only include wizards, elves, and that kind of thing. It can include anything fantastical that's out of this world, so this list is going to have a lot of that. And with that being said, we have a lot to get through today, so for a bit, we're just going to be naming these games in no particular order to keep things moving and kind of give you a big list of fantasy games you need to play without any interruptions. So let's get started. Okay, let's kick things off with number 15, Fire Emblem Three Houses. The Fire Emblem games always actually manage to really kind of hit hard with their stories, and Three Houses definitely continues that trend. It's a massive game with 4 main story campaigns, or maybe we should call it routes. They're all longer than they have any right being, and they tell these rich, complex stories about politics, war, and the humans and the inhumans that kind of get caught in the middle of these things. All these campaigns all tell their own stories, but it's always the thing between 3 powers, different nations, and is centered around the monastery of Garreg Mach, a location that's home to these 3 academies that train the future leaders and heroes of these nations. You play as the very ambiguous player character Byleth, who becomes a teacher at the monastery and takes charge of students from one of these different houses. Depending on which house you pick, the game tells a totally different story centered around different characters, and things get really tricky considering that any of these characters can wind up dying. Some characters are set in stone, but the vast majority can die in any battle, and the story will have a few contingencies for it. But what stands out here are the characters. This game really does have a wide cast of likable and flawed folks that have these big personalities and interesting interactions between each other. Really, Fire Emblem Three Houses nails its characters. Some of them just want to aid their nation, some want revenge for terrible crimes, others just want to have a good time. There's so many different characters that I'd say it's like kind of hard to have a bad roster, and their interactions between each other and growing relationship makes the storytelling all the better. Next at number 14, it's Octopath Traveler II. Now, admittedly, I do think the second game is best for storytelling overall, but by its nature, the Octopath games have storytelling spread all over the place, because, these stories are centered around multiple different main characters and their own personal journey that you follow them through. Individually, a lot of the stories in Octopath 1 often felt very truncated and didn't really go a whole lot of places, but in Octopath 2, it's clearly where they kind of figured out what they were doing, because all the stories generally feel longer, more involved, and just better. This is a series with a problem when it comes to deeper engagement with its stories. You're never actually part of the stories, you're just following characters around as if they've never met or are aware of each other in any way. So it can be pretty jarring to just have things continue as if these characters never did absolutely incredible things in the last chapter, but still, the stories being told here, they're pretty good. There's the scholar Oswald, who seeks vengeance against the businessman who ruined his life and stole his research, while Agnia, the dancer, wants to bring joy to the world through the power of dance. But their stories eventually kind of take a darker turn. Really, all the story paths you go down start in one place and end in a completely different place, and the writing is generally pretty strong. It helps that it's mostly voice acted and done pretty well at that. Octopath Traveler 2 is a good example of how to tell multiple fantasy stories, even if bringing it all together in the end is a little awkward. Though I do admit it, the mystery in the background through each story slowly being revealed is pretty interesting, especially for a game that's all about having that retro JRPG look and feel. Next up at number 13, we have the 2018 God of War. Look, nobody really expected the God of War series to bounce back in such a big way, so quickly. I mean, this isn't a series without good stories. The original trilogy told a perfectly good fantasy story, but it was centered around an unlikable rage monster who mostly just mumbled and screamed a lot. Kratos has always been kind of a big jerk, and the writing almost goes out of its way to make a point of what an unpleasant person he was. And so that's part of what makes God of War so interesting. Kratos is still clearly a guy with some issues, but he's not just a baldy meathead who screams and kills everything in his path, at least, well, not anymore. This guy is a changed man. He's killed multiple pantheons worth of gods at this point, so he's got nothing left to prove. He's spent his life and has ended it more than once, and his character arc here is all about redemption. Will Kratos keep being the destructive force he's always been, or will he calm down a bit and put away childish things? It's a significant character shift, so it could seem jarring if done wrong, but the writing here is just so good. It manages to be a compelling character piece, but they also manage to touch on Kratos' past in clever ways, and then still tell this really interesting narrative in this really interesting world, with so many characters and gods and twists and turns. For some, it's one of the best stories in an action game yet. Coming in next at number 12, we have The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. The Witcher games were always kind of building on top of the old school CRPG fantasy games with more sophisticated and, yeah, sometimes more brutal storytelling. The first two games did their best with the technology of the time, but The Witcher 3 really brought these games to a whole new level. And a big part of why it was such a hit was not just the interesting sense of adventure, but the character-based storytelling, the great fantasy writing on display here. CD Projekt's third crack at telling a Witcher story does continue kind of stepping all over the toes of the original books, but the story here is so well told, it actually can be easy to forget that it's not entirely faithful to the source material. Basically, as Geralt searching for Ciri to make sure she doesn't die or get captured by the evil Wild Hunt, that's the whole thing. And along the way, you have so many twists and turns and interesting characters to deal with, and really no two monster hunting scenarios or storylines are alike. It's a massive game, and while I think the actual writing itself can be a little inconsistent at times, especially depending on who's translating it, the stories themselves are really interesting and compelling. Plus, of course, like we said when talking about this entire video, games like this, it's the characters that really carry the plot and make Witcher 3 work. But yeah, overall, The Witcher 3 is a masterpiece on its own. Now next at number 11, let's take things down a notch and let's talk Dragon's Dogma 2. Now the main story might not be the most original or compelling thing in the world. I'm talking the main quest line, but where Dragon's Dogma 2 really shines is in its world and its incredible side quests. Just a variety of them and how challenging they could be, not just with combat, but with what you're going to be dealing with. The writing on average is just top notch, with interesting scenarios and often surprising outcomes. Often notably not what you probably expect from a game like this, a fantasy RPG, especially if you've played a lot of them. These quests will really find ways to surprise you. They really kind of expertly zig when you'd expect the game to zag. It's a really satisfying game if you're looking for something like that, and if you want to engage with every plot thread. Sometimes when I play a game, I don't want to have my hand held, and Dragon's Dogma 2 really does that. Thankfully, the pawns do sometimes step in and interject and help keep a narrative thread going if you maybe forgot something. But still, Dragon's Dogma 2 is just a unique game that kind of feels like fantasy RPG storytelling, but on a different wavelength, because it's like Morrowind levels of obtuse sometimes. Now at number 10, we have Warhammer Vermintide 2. Obviously, you're not playing this one for the plot. You can't even really call it like a story-driven game. It's a Left 4 Dead style horde co-op game. You pick a character, go through a level, kill a lot, and that's it. But the game manages to tell a story kind of in the background of each level, and it's all extremely specific and detailed to the Warhammer Fantasy Old World setting. This remains really the only current Old World video game that's still ongoing now that Total War Warhammer 3 is complete, and I'm telling you, it's some fans of the series' favorite thing. It's an absolute must-play if you're a Warhammer fan, just because of the care and craft on display. Even if you don't care about the lore, the game actually manages to tell compelling drama through the creepy narration of the different villains. Each one of these villainous antagonists are just absolutely despised. The Skaven are pathetic cowards, while the Chaos leaders are haughty pricks, but they're all memorable, often iconic voices that echo through each level, taunting you and your heroes because they think they've already won. It's just good stuff, I don't know how else to describe it, and a firm reminder that you don't need cutscenes and dialogue interruptions every 5 minutes to tell a compelling fantasy story. The writing and voice work here just elevates the game, you know, in a way that most fantasy games don't really bother with, just the immersive storytelling. Now at number 9, we have Hades 2. Hades really is just a major step up in how Supergiant Games tells its stories. They always had ambitious narratives in their games, but Hades really changed that because it gives you this massive world of incredibly in-depth cartoony Greek mythology characters that have layers and layers of flashy dialogue to go through. The first game was a writing tour de force, just incredibly impressive in how many ways it managed to keep the player engaged with the story, while also making sure the gameplay and the story are always inextricable here. That's why Hades is such a remarkable story, and it manages to do it all without actually having like a conventional story in the way that we're used to. There's no big cutscenes, no massive scripted events. It's all done through small, bite-size or not so bite-sized bits of dialogue at the start and end of levels. The actual plot moves at a snail's pace, and that only gets slower with each repeat of the same dialogue sequence that repeats, but the writing here is just so good you don't mind it. You don't even notice it. You just want to get back out there and see what happens next. Now for the sake of this list, we want to talk Hades 2 because it's the recent one, but really you could substitute it back for the original, because it really actually accomplishes the same thing, but it is just more polished and accomplished. Coming in next, Baldur's Gate 3 is another one of those games where the actual overall plot is not the most exciting thing. It's relatively simple. It's the personal stake of your created character that really helps drive the main narrative. But where Baldur's Gate 3 really excels is the density of player's choice and the freedom in the storytelling. Very few games can match the scope and depth of Baldur's Gate 3. It's so detailed, and its quest and plot structures are really ambitious in a way that most other games can't even really attempt. Most of that is just down to Larian's skill at engineering these incredibly complex gameplay systems, and then their willingness to give players basically free reign to do whatever the hell they want. They don't even seem to care about the technical challenges of pulling it all off. Larian has a skill that few other developers match, but also that unyielding stubbornness required to make a game like Baldur's Gate 3. There is just so much choice, so many different little ways things can go, and it's really impressive. And along the way, it's that classic adventure fantasy where bad stuff is going down and you gotta find interesting people to help to, stop the bad stuff. Really, the storytelling magic here is that your choices matter. Things can go your way, things can backfire in a big way, and it all is fun and interesting and worth it. Next up at number 7, we have Ni no Kuni 2: Revenant Kingdom. Where so many stories on this list are gritty and complex and often cynical, Ni no Kuni 2 is the exact opposite. It's an optimistic and heartwarming game with an absolutely bizarre and jaw-dropping opening. It's the year 2018, you buy a game about a little catboy prince, but before you play as him, you begin as the president of a modern nation. His city is nuked by terrorists, then I guess he dies, or maybe falls asleep, and wakes in another world where he finds the little kingdom of Ding Dong Dell under threat of coup. So you help the prince understand what's going on, and then they escape to go and create their own new kingdom. And that's the game, really. It's about building a new kingdom. You go from nothing, you meet people, you unlock new resources and stuff, and on paper, the plot is actually pretty basic, aside from, when you start as the president of a nation, but it's all the little stories along the way and compelling character moments that really keep things feeling lively and entertaining, and it keeps your motivations going, and it does a really good job at it, How many other games can you play as the president of a nation wielding a sword during a fantasy adventure out there? It's pretty unique. Now at number 6, it's Monster Hunter World. Guys with giant anime swords slaying giant monsters is a simple premise, but it's just fun. And the execution in Monster Hunter World is really great. While you won't find the same super hardcore focus on story like in some of the other games I've mentioned so far, you do get that brilliant fantasy experience, like a classic one. Look, fantasy isn't just about elves and orcs and big epic gods and demigods. It's really also about dragons and monsters of brutal power, and then the heroes that slay them. And Monster Hunter World just really nails it. I dunked on the story a bit, but they actually still do a really good job with it. The human characters are compelling enough to keep you going, but then your actual characters' adventures are customized and personal, just going on all these grand hunts around these incredible environments with some of the best hack and slash action known to man. Monster Hunter, man. There's a reason why the franchise is so popular. Monster Hunter World in particular, though, is just a really good game, and it deserves to be mentioned somewhere here. Next over at number 5, Path of Exile 2. Look, Diablo 4 didn't really live up to the hype, and in the meantime, the devs behind Path of Exile have been slowly but very surely crafting a brilliant alternative. The original Path of Exile is great, but all eyes are on its sequel, and the sequel just nails what the fans want, and that's why we put it here on this list. Path of Exile 2 is a next-generation action RPG, and it features in-depth classes, skills, passives, and all that. But then it throws in co-op, moody, dark continent, incredible environments with unique cultures and ancient secrets and brooding dangers waiting to strike. Path of Exile 2 manages to keep the old-school fantasy adventure vibes to go along with that incredible action RPG gameplay. It also features a brand new campaign too, with 6 acts, a ton of distinct environments, monsters, and over 100 different bosses. It supports online co-op, of course, with a party of up to 6 players to tackle it all. So, like a lot of things on this list, it's another massive game with a lot going on. But if you're just looking for that satisfying fantasy adventure, look no further. Path of Exile 2 is definitely one we wanted to squeeze here. Now down at number 4, you didn't see this one coming. It's Final Fantasy 15. And we're saying that because while Final Fantasy games are stellar for what little cutscene-based storytelling they manage to cram into the games, they're usually relatively linear, except for this one. Final Fantasy 15 is a fantasy game that creates an open world to truly explore. Sure, the movement is more realistic than you'd expect, and there are even cars to drive rather than dragons to ride, but the in-game world really grabs you right away. It has incredible steampunk vibes, and it's absolutely gorgeous if you're running on PC with the highest graphical setting. And of course, the story is interesting enough. At least me personally, it didn't feel revolutionary in the same way as other games in the franchise, but I still liked it, and it does enough to keep you playing Final Fantasy 15. It's just a mashup of a bunch of different things. Some things pulled from this franchise's incredible legacy, some other things that are totally weird and out of left field, and it just creates something different, a fantasy game unlike any other. And that's why we're giving it points here. Now obviously, if you come to us 10 years later and you say that you gave up on the game and didn't finish it, totally understandable. Some people, it's not for everybody, and you know when enough is enough, right? But the game is worth trying because of how unique it is. If you like weird vibes, road trip vibes, and also fantasy magical swords and stuff like that, this is a game that is hard to ignore. Now at number 3, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild came out in 2017, but if you take it right now and compare it to every newly released games, it still holds up really well, and that's among both Nintendo exclusives and other fantasy games that are out considered the best in the market. It actually has a lot in common with Skyrim, despite the games looking radically different. What they have in common is that great sense of fantasy adventure. What sets Legend of Zelda apart from the rest is its great dungeons, which are kind of legend by themselves at this point, and its puzzles, which are definitely one of its most defining features. And it's The Legend of Zelda, man. There's magic, swords, and cool characters, and lots of emotional cutscenes. You know what you're signing up for with a Zelda game, but Breath of the Wild just really pushed it, especially with this massive open world, tons of different tools and ways to explore it and get around it. It really just gives Zelda fans everything they'd want to do and more. For some people, arguably a little bit too much. They miss some of the classic Zelda-isms, but still, I think that's a big discussion for another day. Fantasy games. You know, we're talking the here, and Breath of the Wild is one of the best, hands down. Now at number 2, we have Metaphor ReFantazio. It's always kind of tricky to put a newer game on a list like this because, you know, you don't always want to recognize another flavor of the week that will soon be forgotten, but I don't know. At the time of making this list, Metaphor ReFantazio has only been out for more than a year, but it looks like it already. Like, it's this game that's going to be replayed in like the JRPG niche for years to come. And I got to admit, one of the reasons why I wanted to put it here is because a lot of people aren't going to play it, but let me tell you, it has one of the best stories in any RPG in recent years. I'm not going to get into it, but it essentially is about your role in choosing the successor to an assassinated king. But it weaves through so many more interesting topics like racism, inequality, extremism, without coming across as heavy-handed or preachy. So to sum it up, kind of like the opposite of Euphoria, the whole team here at this channel play a ton of games, and we rarely agree on anything. But we all pretty much agreed that Metaphor has a brilliant fantasy story. It manages to be both relatable and relevant to current topics while not devolving into grandpa shaking his fist at clouds, and all while still being an incredible fantasy adventure. Now finally, at number 1, it's Elden Ring. I know it's kind of impossible not to mention Elden Ring when talking about fantasy games, but it's also on every single list out there, man. It's really hard not to get tired of seeing the same game at the top of every list. However, it's there for a reason, and that's because it's a really fantastic game. It may be hard and unforgiving at times, but it's a satisfying fantasy adventure. And with a lot of that George R.R. Martin kind of fantasy setting and vibes, it works. There's so much to do and see, and the game gives you so much freedom from the start. It really is the pinnacle of everything From Software has been working towards since Demon's Souls, and Elden Ring is arguably the most accessible of any Souls-like to date. Sure, it's difficult, but the game's open nature means that there's plenty of opportunities to level up fast around the world, get some really strong gear early on, making it a much more manageable experience for most players of any previous FromSoft RPG. So like it or not, I had to mention Elden Ring. Sorry if you're sick of hearing that name, but we had to keep it real. It is just pretty much hundreds or even thousands hours worth of brilliance. Now look, we've given you quite a long list of some of the best fantasy games that we really love, but of course there are fantasy games that we just couldn't fit onto this list. So if you know of a superb fantasy game that we haven't mentioned, you gotta let us know. There is so much in this genre that if we did miss something, some of them might actually be games that we haven't even played. So we would love to learn about them for gamer journalistic reasons, but also for personal reasons. So please do shout any games we've missed in the comments below.